I used to think rock bottom was that morning my wife discovered my affair, her hands clutching printed hotel receipts, eyes empty with betrayal. Little did I know, my true rock bottom was only moments away, on that cursed, zombie-riddled train ride. My name is Vincent Johnson, 43, conductor of the Orient Crown Express, a train that carries the obscenely wealthy across picturesque landscapes they barely glance at between champagne sips. 15 years working this job has hollowed me out, scraped away whatever idealism I once possessed until all that remains is a husk in a pressed uniform, smiling on command. Then came mandatory therapy, courtesy of the railway's Employee Wellness Initiative. Dr. Chen's office smelled of sandalwood and broken dreams. "You're experiencing occupational depression," she told me. "When was the last time you spent quality time with your daughter?" I couldn't remember. Our visits had devolved into awkward meals at chain restaurants, both of us checking our phones to avoid conversation. "She needs to see who you really are," Dr. Chen suggested. "Not just the man who left, but the man who's trying to return." I called my now ex-wife, Margaret, who surprisingly agreed that Claire could accompany me on the new winter route. "She needs to understand what you do," Margaret said, her voice softer than I deserved. "Maybe then she'll stop thinking you left because of her." That sentence was a knife between my ribs. Claire thought I'd left because of her? The knowledge settled in my gut like a stone. And that's how, on a Tuesday morning heavy with falling snow, Claire came to be slouched in the first-class lounge, drowning in an oversized hoodie that proclaimed, "Hate Monday, love coffee," thumbs dancing across her phone screen. She looked painfully out of place among the tailored suits discussing hedge funds and stock portfolios. For a moment, I felt a stab of pride watching her roll her eyes at their practiced laughter. At least divorce hadn't transformed her into one of them. Of course, had I known I was about to drag her into humanity's apocalypse on steel wheels, I would have told her to stay with her mother. But for now, when the boarding call sounded, in a chime that signaled to the wealthy that their chariot awaited, I straightened my spine, adjusted my cap, and became Conductor Johnson, the serviceable ghost who anticipates needs and disappears when no longer required. "Come on," I told Claire, "stay close, and whatever you do, don't mention their net worth. They hate being reminded of the specific amount of their obscene fortunes." She actually laughed then, a sound so unexpected it startled us both. So with a practiced smile plastered across my face, I opened the doors to the Orient Crown Express and welcomed the wealthy aboard. And that's how our descent into hell began. The boarding process began in a parade of cashmere coats and calculated indifference. But in the blur, two figures stood out. First, Elias Harrington, pharmaceutical magnate and rumored developer of some revolutionary anti-fear medication. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who'd never heard the word no, shadowed by security personnel who scanned the train with mechanical precision. The second was more surprising, Alexandra Carter, tech billionaire and notorious recluse. Unlike the other passengers who treated the train as their birthright, she moved with an observant quietness, eyes taking in details others ignored, including me. "Vincent Johnson," she said, approaching as I directed a porter where to store her modest luggage. "I've read about your safety record. Impressive." The recognition was so unexpected I nearly stumbled. "Miss Carter, welcome aboard. Call me Alex, please." She smiled, not the practiced social smile of the wealthy, but something genuine. "I've been looking forward to seeing the Orient Crown's operation firsthand." Before I could respond, Johnny, my assistant conductor, interrupted us, his face pale beneath his cap. "Vincent, could I speak with you? It's urgent." I excused myself, following Johnny to a service corridor where he produced a document thick with legal jargon. "They're offering staff 10 grand to sign this," he whispered, hands slightly trembling. "Non-disclosure agreement about special cargo in the baggage car." I scanned the document. Phrases like biochemical materials and experimental transport protocols jumped out. "Who's offering?" "Harrington's people. Said it's just standard procedure for pharmaceutical transport, but..." Johnny glanced nervously down the corridor. 10 grand is a lot of money for standard procedure. Something cold settled in my stomach. "Don't sign it. Tell the others to hold off too." "Already did, but..." Johnny lowered his voice further. Martinez took the money. So did Terrence and half the dining staff. The betrayal stung sharper than it should have. These were colleagues, people I'd worked alongside for years, now bought with what amounted to pocket change for Harrington. "Keep an eye on that cargo," I told Johnny. "I want to know if anything unusual happens." As the train pulled away from the station, I retrieved Claire from where I'd left her with a porter. The familiar rumble beneath my feet usually brought comfort, a reminder that for all its pretensions, the train answered to me. But today, it felt like the first tremor of an approaching earthquake. As crystal chandeliers swing with the train's movement, the Orient Crown Express starts gliding through the winter landscapes like a steel predator. It wouldn't take more than 2 hours into our journey for the complaints to begin rolling in like gathering storm clouds. A businessman insisted his suite's lighting was depressingly industrial. A socialite demanded her bed linens be replaced because they smelled of previous occupation. I dispatched staff like a general deploying troops in a war of trivialities. But then, the screams started. Not the regular cries of the privileged denied their comforts, but primal shrieks that chilled my blood. They came from the premium dining car, a sanctuary of white tablecloths and crystal where passengers enjoyed 7-course lunches paired with astronomically priced wines. "Stay here," I ordered Claire, locking her in my private compartment. "Don't open this door for anyone but me." I moved toward the sounds, each step carrying me further from the world I understood. What I found came to redefine the word horror. The dining car had transformed into an abattoir. A woman in pearls crouched atop a man in a business suit, her teeth tearing chunks from his throat with animalistic determination. Nearby, the wine steward, a dignified man who could identify wine regions by scent alone, was methodically eating the fingers of a struggling passenger as if sampling delicate canapes. I froze in the doorway, mind struggling to process the scene. A waiter staggered toward me, his movements uncoordinated. His eyes were wrong, pupils dilated to black pools, leaving only a thin ring of iris. Blood spattered his white jacket, some his own from a gash across his forehead, some clearly belonging to others. "Sir," I managed, my voice distant in my own ears. "Are you injured?" He responded with a wet, guttural snarl and lunged. Pure instinct saved me, as I grabbed a heavy silver tray and swung it like a shield. It connected with his head with a sickening crack. He staggered but didn't fall, so I swung again, harder, and this time his skull gave way with a sound like stepping on a rotten fruit. He collapsed, no longer breathing. I'd just killed a man. The thought floated in my mind, strangely detached, almost surreal. Then survival instinct kicked in. I needed to get back to Claire. Just then, my radio crackled with Chef Martine's panicked voice. "They're everywhere. The passengers, the staff, they've gone mad. They're eating each other." So I ran as fast as I could, dodging screaming passengers and blood-soaked staff who moved with the same wrong-eyed hunger. The Orient Crown Express, playground of the elite, had become a slaughterhouse on rails. The luxury that once defined the train now amplified its horror. Blood looked even more red against cream carpets. Screams echoed louder through acoustically perfected corridors. The infected, I had no better word for them, seemed to retain fragments of their former selves. A socialite still clutched her designer handbag while feeding on her husband's intestines. A businessman straightened his tie between bites of his assistant's face. I fought my way back to Claire, staying low and moving between cars during brief lulls in the infected's attention, slipping past them as they got distracted by fresh victims. My uniform, once a symbol of authority, now made me a target. Those infected seemed particularly drawn to staff. Twice I had to fight colleagues who lunged at me, their eyes vacant, mouths foaming with bloody spittle. When I reached my compartment, Claire's terrified face appeared at the crack of the door. Relief hit me like a physical blow when she launched into my arms. "Dad, what's happening? People are screaming about zombies." "Something like that," I said, holding her tighter than I had in years. "Some kind of infection. Stay behind me. We need to get to the locomotive." The train's route display showed we'd veered off our scheduled path. Not by much, just enough to take us away from population centers, toward more isolated terrain. Was it just a coincidence? The cold feeling in my gut said otherwise. As we moved cautiously, at a junction, we encountered Alexandra Carter, the billionaire who'd spoken to me earlier. She had barricaded herself in a private toilet compartment, with a fire extinguisher clutched in white-knuckled hands. Her expensive clothes were torn in the space so confined that her knees pressed against the door as she crouched. "Johnson," she gasped when she recognized me. "What the hell is happening?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think Harrington's involved. There was something in the baggage car, experimental cargo." Her expression hardened. That bastard. I knew he was cutting corners with the clinical trials. "You know about his research?" I was approached as an investor. She emerged from the bathroom, still gripping the extinguisher. "His miracle drug, a serum that eliminates empathy in high performers. The marketing pitch was brilliant, actually. Unlock your full potential by removing emotional obstacles to success." "That's horrifying," Claire whispered. Carter's laugh was hollow. "That's the endgame. Create executives and leaders who can make the ruthless decisions that shareholders demand without the inconvenient burden of conscience." Harrington called it emotional optimization. I called it weaponized sociopathy. "You turned down the investment," I said. "Not immediately." Her eyes clouded with something like shame. "The projected returns were substantial, but his testing protocols crossed lines even I wouldn't touch. When I walked away, he found other investors, ones with fewer scruples and deeper pockets. The thought chilled me. Were we simply lab rats in Harrington's experiment? Or worse, were we disposable evidence to be eliminated when the experiment failed? We pushed onward through the bloodied corridor until we reached the communications car where an emergency systems panel was mounted. Not a full control system, but enough to monitor train status, emergency communications, and most importantly, provide a momentary shelter with a locking door. But inside, we saw Martinez, my co-conductor, hunched over the console. Blood dripped from a wound on his shoulder. "Martinez," I called cautiously, relieved to see my second co-conductor alive. "Are you yourself?" He turned slowly. His eyes were clear, frightened but human. "Vincent, thank God. I thought everyone was gone. What happened to your shoulder?" "One of the kitchen staff bit me." His voice trembled. "I locked myself in here, but I'm feeling strange. Hot, like my skin's too tight." I kept my distance, remembering the waiter who'd attacked me. "The train's off route. Did you redirect it?" Shame crossed his face. "Harrington's security chief made me, said it was a precautionary measure. They threatened my family, Vincent." "Where are we headed?" "Some private research facility, 30 miles north." With a trap closing around us, I needed to regain control of the train, but Martinez was between me and the console. And judging by the sweat beading on his forehead, the infection was taking hold. "I need to reset our course," I said carefully. "Move away from the controls, Martinez." His eyes narrowed, something feral flickering behind them. "They'll kill my family." "They'll kill all of us if we don't get help," I countered. Then, with no warning, Martinez jumped directly at me, fingers hooked like claws. I shoved Claire behind me as Martinez crashed into my chest. We grappled across the control room, his strength surprising, his teeth snapping inches from my throat. "Dad!" Claire screamed. A metallic clang rang out, and Martinez collapsed, revealing Alexandra Carter standing behind him, fire extinguisher raised. "He was turning," she said simply. I nodded, shaken. "We need to lock him in." "Why not kill him?" Her voice was detached. "He's infected." The question hit me like ice water. Was this what we were now? People who casually discussed murder? "He might recover," I said, though I didn't believe it. "And I won't become a killer if I have a choice." We secured Martinez in a cramped crew sleeping compartment, barely the size of a closet but equipped with a locking door. The tiny space, meant for staff to rest during long journeys, now became an improvised cell. Then I accessed the controls. The navigation system confirmed what he'd said. We were being diverted to a private siding that didn't appear on any public railway maps. "I can override it," I said, "but we need access to the main locomotive. These controls are limited." Will that stop what's happening to the passengers? Claire asked. No, Carter answered before I could. But it might get us somewhere we can get real help instead of whatever Harrington has planned. We needed to move forward toward the locomotive, but that meant passing through the premium cabins, the heart of the infection. And to do that, we needed more allies and equipment. So we gathered what weapons we could, maintenance tools, kitchen implements, a fire axe from an emergency cabinet. Claire clutched a heavy flashlight like a lifeline, while Carter, surprisingly, produced a small taser from her luggage. Personal security, she explained at my raised eyebrow. Being a woman with money makes you a target. We moved cautiously toward the staff quarters, hoping to recruit more survivors. In the kitchen car, we found Chef Martin and 3 of his assistants barricaded behind overturned meal carts. They'd been fending off infected passengers with kitchen knives and boiling water. They went crazy after the lunch service, Martin explained, his white coat splattered with blood. Like animals, started biting, tearing at each other. I saw Harrington's people watching, taking notes. They didn't even try to help. My jaw tightened. Harrington's testing some kind of drug. Anti-fear serum. What? Martin spat. Using us as guinea pigs? Looks that way, Carter confirmed. And I'm betting the antidote is in the baggage car with his other research materials. Hope flickered across Martin's face. There's a cure? There should be, she replied. Standard pharmaceutical protocol requires antagonist compounds during human trials. Even in Harrington's twisted version of research, he'd have it on hand. A new plan quickly formed. Before going to the locomotive, we'd split into 2 groups. Martin and his team would create a diversion while Carter, Claire, and I made our way to the baggage car. If we could secure Harrington's research and any antidote, we might save some of the less severely infected. As we prepared to move out, I pulled Claire aside. You should stay here with Chef Martin. It's safer. Her eyes, so like her mother's, hardened with determination. I'm staying with you. Claire, did you stay in a safe place when you were having your affair with Sophia? The unexpected words hit like a physical blow. Mom told me everything, so don't pretend you're protecting me now. The raw hurt in her voice stripped me bare. I'm sorry, I said, inadequate words for years of damage. I failed you, failed your mother, but I won't fail you again. Please, stay here. I'm coming with you, she repeated, because I don't trust you not to disappear again. Her words carved new wounds atop old scars, but I recognized the truth in them. I nodded, accepting both her decision and the judgment behind it. We moved out, Martin's team heading toward the dining car to create chaos while we slipped toward the baggage section. The train's elegant corridors had become a nightmare landscape. Blood smeared the walls in handprints and spray patterns. Luxury suites stood open, their contents ransacked or worse, occupied by feeding infected who paid us no mind as they gorged on former friends and rivals. In the observation car, with its panoramic windows now streaked with blood, we saw something unexpected. Terrence, my longtime colleague, holding a gun on a bloodied passenger. Vincent, he exhaled in relief. Thank God. The passenger, a dignified older man in a ruined suit, raised beseeching hands. Please, I'm not infected. He's trying to rob me. I hesitated, confused. Terrence, what's going on? Don't listen to him, Terrence replied. He's turning. I saw him twitching, foaming at the mouth. But the man's eyes were clear, his movements normal aside from terror, and Terrence's focus wasn't on the man's face for symptoms. It was on the platinum watch on his wrist and the wallet visible in his torn jacket. The world's ending, Terrence continued, a manic edge to his voice. Every man for himself now, right? These rich bastards, they've had it coming. Carter stepped forward. That's my head of research you're threatening. Terrence's eyes widened in recognition. Even better, 2 for 1. I saw it then, the darkness that had always lurked in Terrence, the bitterness not unlike my own, but twisted into something uglier. He'd signed Harrington's NDA, taken the money, knowing what might happen, and now he was using the chaos to settle scores and enrich himself. Lower the gun, I said evenly. Don't be stupid, Vincent, he snapped. We've been stepped on our whole lives by people like them. Time to take what's ours. Claire edged closer to me, fear radiating from her. This was human evil, not the mindless hunger of the infected, but calculated cruelty. In some ways, more terrifying. Last chance, Terrence warned, gun shifting between us. Knowing what I had to do, I lunged at him, shoving Claire behind me. The gun fired, a deafening crack in the confined space. Pain exploded in my shoulder as I crashed into Terrence. We grappled for the weapon, his face contorted with rage. Then, in the struggle, the gun went off again. Terrence went rigid, then limp. This time, the bullet had caught Terrence under the chin, exiting through the top of his skull. Death was instantaneous, his expression frozen in permanent surprise. I staggered back, shoulder bleeding, mind reeling. Another colleague dead, this one by his own greed. Claire stared at Terrence's body, her face pale with shock. Are you all right? Carter helped her researcher to his feet. Dr. Freeman, she introduced him. He was working on a competing project to Harrington's, one with actual ethical standards. I pressed my hand to my bleeding shoulder. We need to keep moving. The baggage car isn't far. Claire silently tore a strip from her shirt, binding my wound with trembling hands. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine, and I wondered what she was thinking, watching her father wade through blood and betrayal, witnessing the darkness that money and fear could bring out in people. We pushed onward, the train's gentle rocking now feeling like the swaying of a predator stalking prey. The baggage car loomed ahead, and with it, our best hope for answers and survival. But as we approached the final connector between cars, a figure stumbled from the shadows. My heart seized, then released when I recognized Johnny, my assistant conductor from earlier. But relief curdled into dread as he staggered into the flickering emergency light. Vincent. His voice scraped like metal on concrete. Something's wrong with me. Blood darkened his uniform sleeve where fabric had been torn away. The wound beneath, a perfect crescent of teeth marks, wept a viscous fluid darker than blood should be. His skin had taken on a waxy pallor, perspiration gleaming on his forehead despite the corridor's chill. When, I managed, the word barely audible over the train's mechanical heartbeat. Back in the dining car, I didn't think. A convulsion rippled through him, cutting off his words. I didn't want to slow you down. This was Johnny, who'd covered my shifts when Claire had the flu, who'd listened to my divorce confessions after one too many whiskeys, who'd been the first to congratulate me on my promotion 8 years ago, my friend. We need the antidote, I said, more to myself than him. We're almost to the baggage car. Johnny's pupils expanded, black pools drinking the light from his irises. I can feel it, Vincent, like something crawling inside my skull. His breath hitched, like something else is taking control. My peripheral vision registered Claire shrinking behind me, Carter's hand moving toward her concealed taser. The temperature in the narrow connector seemed to plummet as realization dawned. We were in the transitional space between cars, a metal umbilical with no compartments, no storage closets, nowhere to secure him. Just the gangway plates beneath our feet and emergency release handles on either side. Johnny convulsed again, more violently. When the spasm passed, his posture had subtly shifted, shoulders hunched, fingers curling inward like primitive claws. The change was happening faster than with Martinez, much faster. Vincent, he rasped, my name barely recognizable through a throat constricting with transformation. Do it. I can't. Hold it back. Claire's fingernails dug into my arm. Dad. Time compressed to a single, horrible point of clarity. If we hesitated, Johnny would turn completely. He would attack. In this confined space with no escape route, someone would die. Possibly Claire. My fingers found the emergency release. Cold metal against trembling skin. Johnny. My voice cracked along fault lines of grief. What words could possibly suffice? Sorry. Thank you. Goodbye. His eyes cleared momentarily, the real Johnny looking out at me through a rapidly narrowing window of humanity. It's okay, Vincent. Not your fault. I pulled the handle. The pneumatic hiss of the connector door sliding open consumed all other sound. Beyond it, night rushed past at 60 miles per hour, the ground a distant darkness punctuated by occasional snowdrifts. Wind howled into our faces, a banshee's welcome. Johnny stumbled, his body racked with convulsions that seemed to originate from his very DNA. He teetered at the threshold, the void pulling at him like gravity's hungry cousin. Our eyes met one final time, understanding passed between us, an acknowledgement of what had to be done, forgiveness offered and accepted in a heartbeat. I placed my hand on his chest and pushed. There was no scream. The night simply swallowed him, his body a momentary shadow against deeper blackness before vanishing completely. The door automatically sealed shut, cutting off the howling wind, leaving us in a silence broken only by Claire's strangled sob. The weight of what I'd done crashed over me like a physical wave. I'd killed Johnny, my friend, pushed him from a speeding train with my own hands. I leaned against the cold metal wall, suddenly unable to bear my own weight. Was this shock? Or was I finally fracturing under the accumulation of atrocities this night demanded? We need to keep moving. Carter's voice cut through my spiral. The baggage car. Yes, the baggage car. The antidote. Harrington. Focus on that. Don't think about Johnny's eyes in that final moment. Don't think about his body broken on frozen earth. Don't think about how you just murdered your friend to save your daughter. Let's go, I said, my voice unrecognizable even to myself. The baggage car door was sealed with an electronic lock, not standard for the Orient Crown Express. Carter examined it, frowning. Biometric, she said. Fingerprint scanner. Harrington's people upgraded security. Can we bypass it? I asked. Freeman shook his head. Not without Harrington's print or an override code. Then, as if summoned by his name, a voice called from behind us. Looking for me? We turned to find Elias Harrington standing at the far end of the corridor, flanked by 2 security personnel. Unlike the chaos surrounding us, he remained immaculate, suit unwrinkled, hair perfectly styled. The only hint of disorder was a thin line of blood spatter across his Italian leather shoes. I must say, I'm impressed by your resilience, he continued, approaching with casual confidence. Most of the staff succumbed within the first hour. You did this, I said, struggling to contain my rage. You infected an entire train. He smiled thinly. A regrettable but necessary field test. The controlled trials weren't yielding actionable data. These are people, not lab rats, Carter interjected. You've committed mass murder. I've advanced science, he countered. My serum could revolutionize treatment for anxiety, PTSD, phobias. Imagine a world where debilitating fear no longer exists. A world of monsters, Freeman muttered. Harrington's smile tightened. Side effects can be mitigated. That's why we need the data from this unfortunate incident. You have an antidote, I said. It wasn't a question. A prototype, he acknowledged. In the baggage car with my other research materials. Security protocol, standard procedure to avoid contamination. But I can't reach it alone. His eyes met mine, calculating. If you want my help, you'll ensure I survive to administer it. The audacity was breathtaking. He unleashes hell, then bargains for his own safety. But we needed him, both for the antidote and his fingerprint to access the baggage car. Fine, I said through gritted teeth. But you'll help everyone who's still human, not just your rich friends. Of course, he agreed smoothly. Too smoothly. It made no sense for Harrington to help us. Carter caught my eye, a warning in her expression. She didn't trust him either. But what choice did we have? Harrington approached the scanner, pressing his thumb against the glass. The lock clicked open. Inside, the baggage car had been hastily converted into a makeshift laboratory. Compact equipment had been secured to the walls and floor, strategically arranged to maximize the limited space. Padded crates of carefully packed vials were strapped to the built-in cargo restraints, while 2 laptop stations displayed scrolling data, heart rates, brain activity, and infection progression. They're monitoring the entire train, Freeman realized, examining a screen. Cameras, vitals, everything. As I said, a field test, Harrington moved to a refrigerated case. The antidote requires careful handling. It neutralizes the primary compound but can't reverse advanced infection. He retrieved a metal case containing rows of syringes filled with amber liquid. There's limited supply, he warned. We must prioritize. Everyone gets treated, I insisted. That's not medically sound, he countered. Those with advanced symptoms will waste doses that could save others. Before I could argue further, screams erupted from the adjacent car. The infected had found us, so Harrington's security personnel moved to secure the door. We need to get to the locomotive, I said. The train's been diverted to some private facility. Yes, Harrington nodded. My research center. They're expecting us. To clean up your mess, Carter spat. Harrington's expression hardened. To salvage valuable data from an unfortunate situation. Don't be naive, Alexandra. Your company tests products on unwitting users every day. Not like this, she replied, but doubt flickered in her eyes. We had the antidote case and needed to move. The infected were pounding on the door, metal beginning to buckle under their collective assault. Harrington's guards fired warning shots through the small windows, buying temporary reprieve. Let's keep walking, I directed. We need to reach the locomotive. We filed into the corridor, Harrington clutching the case of antidotes like a lifeline. Claire stayed close to me, eyes wary as they moved between Harrington and the darkness ahead. Dr. Freeman brought up the rear, carrying a tablet he'd grabbed from the lab that displayed the train's monitoring system. When we reached another coupling between cars, ahead, through the final passenger car, we could see our path to the locomotive. But as we approached, a group of infected staff emerged, moving with the jerky, predatory gait that had become horrifyingly familiar. Back, I hissed, pulling Claire behind me. But retreat was cut off by more figures approaching from behind. We were surrounded. The control room, I pointed to a maintenance door. Through there. We piled into the small room, a secondary systems hub with limited controls but solid steel doors. As I slammed it shut behind us, Freeman's tablet chimed. What is it? Carter asked. His face had gone pale. I've been reviewing the data, the infection patterns, the progression. Something's not right. Meaning? I prompted. The antidote. He looked up at Harrington, who had gone very still. It's not an antidote at all. Harrington's hand moved toward his jacket, but Carter was faster. She had her taser against his throat before he could draw whatever weapon he concealed. Explain, she demanded. Now. It's a second-stage trigger, Freeman continued, horror dawning in his voice. The initial serum creates baseline aggression by suppressing empathy centers in the brain. This compound, he gestured to the case of syringes. It doesn't just accelerate the infection. It focuses it, makes the subjects more controllable. Controllable? I echoed. Directed aggression, Freeman explained. The first stage removes fear and empathy, all the emotional barriers that hold back ruthless decision-making. The second creates responsiveness to specific stimuli, sounds, scents, commands. You're creating attack dogs, Carter realized, human weapons. You misunderstand the vision, Harrington replied, his voice eerily calm despite the taser at his throat. Phase 1 was always meant for the corporate market. Imagine CEOs free from the burden of doubt, from the paralysis of weighing human costs against profit margins. The perfect executive is one who feels no remorse over layoffs, no guilt over environmental damage, no hesitation when crushing competition. I stared at him, revulsion building like bile in my throat. You're talking about turning people into monsters. I'm talking about optimization. His eyes gleamed with the fervor of the truly deluded. The military applications are merely a funding mechanism. The true revolution is in performance enhancement. Imagine Wall Street traders without fear, tech innovators without ethical handbrakes, politicians without... He paused, smiling thinly. Inconvenient compassion. That's why the train was diverted, Claire realized, her voice small but clear. These aren't failed test subjects. They're successful prototypes, just at different stages of transformation. How do we stop it? I demanded. There's a neutralizing agent, Freeman said, Standard research protocol, it would be clearly labeled, probably in a separate containment unit. I won't help you undermine years of research, Harrington snarled. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. My daughter is on this train because of you, because I was stupid enough to bring her into your experiment. You will help us, or I swear to God, I'll throw you to your test subjects myself. Something in my expression must have convinced him. Self-preservation overriding scientific ambition. The blue case, he said finally, behind the centrifuge. It contains the neutralizing compound, but it won't restore those already turned. It just prevents further infection. Freeman moved to the door, determination on his face. I'll go. I know what to look for. I'm coming with you, Carter insisted. No, he countered. You're needed here. Keep the conductor and his daughter safe. He glanced at Harrington with disgust. And keep him contained. Before we could argue, Freeman slipped out the door, disappearing down the corridor and back towards the baggage car. He'll never make it, Harrington said with clinical detachment. By now, the infection density in that section is too high. Carter pressed the taser harder against his neck. For your sake, he'd better. Minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Claire huddled near the control panels, watching the security feeds Freeman had accessed on the tablet. I monitored the corridor through the small reinforced window in the door. He did it, Claire suddenly exclaimed. He's got the blue case. The video showed Freeman retracing his steps, clutching a metal container similar to the one Harrington had retrieved, but smaller. He's coming back this way, I confirmed, seeing his figure darting through the corridor. Then disaster struck. A group of infected kitchen staff rounded the corner, cutting off Freeman's escape route. On the monitor, we watched him back away, searching for an alternative path. Finding none, he made a desperate choice. He opened the blue case, removing a syringe. What's he doing? Claire asked. Insurance, Carter answered grimly. On screen, Freeman injected himself with the neutralizing agent, then carefully placed the case into a maintenance compartment above his head. He looked directly at the camera, pointing upward, before turning to face the approaching infected. He's sacrificing himself, I realized, making sure we can find the cure even if he doesn't make it. Admirable, Harrington remarked, earning glares from all of us. I watched, helpless, as the infected swarmed Freeman. But instead of the feeding frenzy we'd witnessed with other victims, they seemed confused. They circled him, occasionally swiping or snapping, but without the focused aggression they'd shown earlier. The neutralizing agent, Carter breathed. It's disrupting their aggression signals. They sense he's infected but can't fully identify him as prey. He's confusing their instincts. Freeman had bought us a chance. We now knew where the real cure was hidden and that it might offer some protection. But we still needed to reach the locomotive and prevent the train from delivering us to Harrington's facility. We need to move, I said. Now. Our group exited the small control room through an emergency maintenance hatch, stepping onto the narrow external platform between cars. Wind howled past us, cold enough to steal our breath, as we carefully moved along the train's exterior walkway, gripping the side rails tightly. Snowflakes stung our faces, the landscape a dizzying blur below. We edged our way forward, car by car, Harrington stumbling awkwardly, wrists still bound, while Claire clung tightly behind me. The main corridors were too dangerous, infested with infected, forcing us to risk the outside, where one wrong step meant certain death beneath steel wheels. Ahead lay the locomotive, our last hope to regain control. This better work, Carter muttered, her voice lost in the rush of passing wind. Anywhere is better than your research facility, I replied. Before reaching the locomotive, we stopped at an external maintenance door. According to the security feeds we'd seen on Freeman's tablet, this was where he'd hidden the blue case, the genuine neutralizing agent, in an overhead compartment. We slipped inside. The corridor beyond was silent save for the distant echo of screams. Blood streaked the walls in gruesome smears, and the fluorescent lights flickered erratically. My heart sank when I saw the crimson trail on the floor where Freeman must have fallen. There was no sign of him among the living. Claire's breath caught in her throat. He didn't make it, did he? I shook my head, jaw clenched. No, he saved us, and he made sure we'd have the cure. Just ahead was the maintenance compartment he'd indicated on the camera feed. A single overhead hatch stood ajar. Inside, mercifully unbroken and exactly where Freeman had left it, was the small metal container, the real antidote to Harrington's serum. I pulled it free, forcing myself not to think about Freeman's final moments as the infected surrounded him. With the blue case in hand, we continued on. The corridor eventually opened onto another external walkway, and from there, we reached the forward cars leading to the locomotive. Just as we neared the locomotive, we found a battered service hatch that led back inside. Relief flickered in my chest as we stepped into the narrow corridor, lit only by a flickering overhead lamp. But when I got closer to the locomotive cab, I heard sounds from within, wet, clicking growls that had become sickeningly familiar. "Someone's in there," I whispered. "Infected." Claire's hand found mine, squeezing with desperate strength. Carter positioned herself between Harrington and the corridor exit, making it clear he wouldn't be escaping in the confusion. "We have to try," I said. "It's our only chance." On a silent count of 3, I wrenched the door open. Inside, the locomotive cab was a scene from a nightmare. The main driver, O'Donnell, lay sprawled across the control panel, his throat torn open, blood pooling beneath him. Standing over him was Martinez, my co-conductor who had somehow managed to break free earlier. His transformation was complete. His eyes had filmed over with milky cataracts, blood caked around his mouth and down his uniform. He turned at our entrance, head cocking like a predatory bird. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw recognition flicker in those inhuman eyes. Then, without a word, he launched himself at me with terrifying speed. We collided against the control panel, warning lights flashing as our bodies slammed switches. Martinez's strength was unnaturally vicious. He snapped at me, teeth bared, a guttural rattle rising from his chest. I fought to keep his mouth away from my neck, bracing myself against the console. "Carter," I shouted, "the neutralizing agent, use it." She understood immediately, dropping Harrington's leash-like restraints long enough to set the blue case on a shelf. Claire, showing a courage that broke my heart, grabbed a fire extinguisher and discharged it directly into Martinez's face. The freezing foam sent him reeling. That split second was all I needed. I drove a knee into his midsection, then slammed my elbow into his temple as hard as I could. Martinez staggered but did not fall. These infected felt no pain the way we did. Sensing his own skin was at stake, Harrington suddenly dove toward Martinez, using his still-bound wrists like a makeshift garrote around the infected man's neck. The two of them crashed in a tangle of limbs. "Give me a syringe," Carter shouted, flipping open the blue metal case. She produced one of the precious syringes filled with the genuine neutralizing compound. With Harrington wrestling Martinez to a standstill, Carter plunged the syringe into his neck. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Martinez's limbs grew sluggish. He shook his head as if emerging from a nightmare, blinking rapidly. The feral gloss left his eyes, replaced by dawning horror. He mumbled incoherently and slid to the floor, unconscious but alive. I stumbled to the primary controls, forcing them out of their diverted route. With trembling fingers, I punched in Harrington's authorization code, 62419 Alpha Theta. The locomotive lurched. The digital route map flickered as the train adjusted to a new heading, toward a station with actual emergency services. Away from the sanitized slaughterhouse that awaited us, Martinez lay on the floor, his breathing shallow but steady, the feral light in his eyes extinguished by the neutralizing agent. The cure worked. One man saved among countless lost, a fragile victory drowning in an ocean of defeat. I slumped against the control panel, blood, mine, someone else's, sticky between my fingers. The locomotive hummed beneath us, wheels devouring track, carrying us through darkness toward an uncertain salvation. Claire huddled in the corner, her youth scraped raw by the night's horrors. Everything I'd wanted to protect her from had found her anyway. Every shield I'd tried to erect had shattered. "We need to help the others," Carter said, her voice cutting through the static of my thoughts. "There are still passengers who could be saved." I nodded mechanically but couldn't move. My body felt distant, disconnected. a borrowed vessel filled with someone else's trauma. My mind replayed fragments of the night in relentless succession. Johnny's eyes as I pushed him from the train. The waiter's skull giving way beneath the silver tray. Martinez's teeth snapping inches from my throat. The calculus of survival had reduced us all to the same brutal equation, kill or be killed, regardless of what numbers populated our bank accounts. Vincent? Carter's voice again, urgent now. Just give me a minute. A minute to what? To process? To recover? To somehow integrate this night into a coherent narrative that would allow me to continue functioning? No amount of time would be sufficient. Harrington sat cuffed to a nearby rail, his expression unreadable. Had he felt anything when his subjects tore each other apart? Did he recognize the magnitude of his crime, or was it merely a statistical aberration in his grand vision? You were wrong about them, I said finally, my voice foreign to my own ears. About whom? Harrington asked. The wealthy, the passengers. I gestured vaguely at the train beyond our compartment, where blood-painted luxury suites and diamond-draped corpses cooled in velvet-cushioned coffins. I thought they were all like you, monsters wearing human skin, just better at hiding it. A bitter laugh escaped me, bubbling up from some cracked foundation within. 15 years of resentment, 15 years of dividing the world into them and us, the entitled and the serving. But tonight, my voice caught. Tonight showed me monsters exist at every income level. Together, we finally moved toward the door, toward whatever awaited us in the blood-soaked corridors beyond. The blue case of syringes felt heavy in my hands. Salvation for some, but not for all. Never for all. Choices would need to be made. More lives weighed and measured. This train, I said as I reached for the handle, it was always a microcosm. The wealth gap, the servitude, the resentment, all of it contained in steel and luxury, but now it's something else too. What? Claire asked. I met her gaze, seeing in it a reflection of my own exhaustion, my own trauma. A preview of what happens when we stop seeing each other as human. The door opened onto darkness, the corridor beyond silent save for distant moans. We stepped forward together into whatever remained of the night, into whatever remained of ourselves. The train continued its relentless journey toward morning, carrying its cargo of monsters and survivors. The dividing line between them no longer as clear as I once believed. That's the end of this story. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing to my channel would help me out more than you can imagine. I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.